The Law&Crime Network has become Law&Crime Plus and boasts a very successful transition with the takeover of Court TV, and we have some verdicts in the social media trials out west. May it please the audience, I'm Rich Schoenstein. Welcome to So Sue Me. I'm going to talk about these two separate topics. They're both topics that we have covered previously on here, so this is sort of a follow-up episode. But I wanted to look at both of these things, and I have kind of limited time this week to do it. First of all, I want to talk some more about the acquisition of Court TV by the Law&Crime Network and what's going on with that. Recent edition of this podcast, I had two great guests with me, and we talked about the purchase of Court TV by Law&Crime Network, and that post got a lot of attention, a lot of comments. I got a lot of good feedback about it, but it seems to me that people are interested in what has happened to Court TV. And so this week, we heard from none other than Dan Abrams. All right, here we go. A Twitter post from Dan Abrams yesterday says, "We just got viewership numbers from Court TV, and I'm happy to say that since our acquisition, the numbers are up across the board. So thankful for the hard work from the Court TV and Law&Crime Network teams for what has so far been a really harmonious merger." All right, so that's an official comment from Dan Abrams on the state of the merger, the state of the acquisition of Court TV. For transparency purposes, I should say that I know Dan Abrams. I've done a lot of work at Law&Crime Network, as you guys know, so I know Dan. I reached out to Dan and asked if he wanted to come on here and talk about the merger, and he declined. Now, I don't read a lot into that. Dan has a lot of stuff going on, is very busy, and this is not exactly the Joe Rogan program. So I take no offense to the fact that he was unavailable to come on here to talk about the merger, and it may well be that he doesn't want to go on a podcast and get asked questions about the merger. He wants to comment about it on his own, on Twitter or wherever. Now, as for what he had to say, he says viewership numbers are up. I can do nothing but assume that is accurate, although I would say two things about that. One is, it seems to me that there was heightened interest following the acquisition by Law&Crime Network, and that might have produced some additional viewers. Secondly, you had the Corey Richards trial, which was one of the better trials that has been on recently, and that might have produced higher viewership numbers. But whatever you have to say about it, I don't think a few weeks or a month of viewership numbers are enough to figure out how well this acquisition has worked. I think it's going to take more than that. The other thing I want to comment on is Dan says it's been a really harmonious merger. That sounds right from the people who were retained. Of course, because it was an acquisition, there were people who were let go. We covered that last time we were here. That's an unfortunate thing. It happens anytime there's a major acquisition, really in any industry. It's no surprise. So I wouldn't really sign on to the idea that it was harmonious across the board. I think there are some people upset about it, and there are potentially some viewers who don't like the changes. A little more on that to come. Now, in addition, Law&Crime Network this week launched their new product, which is called Law&Crime Plus. So here you go. This is Law&Crime Plus. It's their new website, and it gives you access to all of their programming, including their live programming. You can go right here and get into their live programming. You can get into their various shows. They produce a lot of different shows. You can click on them. You can get past episodes. You can take a look on a case-by-case basis. You'll see here, you can look at Alec Murdaugh, Ruby Franke, Brian Koberger, Karen Reed, or all sorts of different cases. You can delve into those. So it's collecting all of this material in a place and giving users the opportunity to delve in to what they like. For example, you can click in and get back episodes of the Sidebar podcast with Jesse Weber. So for example, you can click on an old episode. This is about some civil litigation against Michael Jackson. And here I am making an appearance in the studio with Jesse Weber to go over those cases. I guess a little bit, I like any website, where you can click on and get my old content. So that seems pretty cool. I went ahead and subscribed. I only did it because it's $3.99 a month. I thought to myself, $4 a month would be too expensive for something like that. We have so many streaming services. $4 seemed too expensive, but $3.99, that seemed reasonable. So I went for the $3.99. In all seriousness, I think it's a good website. If you're into this true crime stuff, you can really dig in. You can get a lot of old content, new content, current content, and you can get at some of the information, the exhibits, the evidence that you might not get if you just watch what's on YouTube or what they report. So that's what Law and Crime is doing. We knew that they were focusing more and more on YouTube and internet content. They had kind of moved away from the daily broadcast. The Court TV is still doing, albeit with a different lineup now. As far as I can tell, Court TV is going to remain on the air until further notice. They reduced the number of hosts they have. They a little bit reduced the number of programs they have and the duration of the day that they're on live. They have these prepackaged programs that they run now in other time slots, but the live trial coverage, as far as I can tell, is more or less 9 to 5, maybe a little more or less, depending on where there's a trial on a particular day. Now, we went on last week, as I said, with my panel discussion where we talked about this merger. I got a lot of comments on the YouTube page about the acquisition of Court TV. A lot of people appreciated the discussion because there hadn't really been any public acknowledgement of what was happening. You knew that there was a merger. You could turn on your TV and see that the lineup was different, but nobody was talking about how it came to be, why it came to be, or what it meant going forward. So a lot of the comments were appreciative just that we were talking about it. In terms of people liking or not liking it, I would say the majority was probably a little bit negative about the change in format at Court TV. I didn't do it scientifically, so I'm not going to give you a count. But my sense looking at the comments were more of them were negative. Of course, my experience is that people with snarky comments are more likely to post than people with nice comments. So I don't know that that really reflects what most people saw. There were comments about individual people who have been on Court TV in the past. I'm going to acknowledge there seems to be a group of people who have some kind of issue with Julie Grant. I don't really get that myself. I think Julie Grant is very talented at what she does. I'd been on her show a number of occasions. She's good. She's intense. She has her heart in it. And you may not always agree with her opinion. She's more or less on the prosecution side more often than not, which is true of some of these other hosts as well. And you may not agree with that, but I think she comes about it honestly and gives some intellectual analysis in what she's presenting. But there were a fair number of comments about her, a fair number, but I found a lot of the comments to be a little bit unfair. By the way, I shouldn't say they were one-sided. There were also a lot of positive comments about her and some of the other Court TV people, positive comments about various of the different hosts. I just found the Julie Grant stuff to be the most divisive. There were people who clearly love her, and there were people who have an issue with her, and I was a little bit taken aback by how much chatter there was about that. Everybody's entitled to an opinion. You don't have to like everybody you see, right? All right, so that's where we are with the Law and Crime Network acquisition of Court TV and the Law and Crime launch of Law and Crime Plus. There's incredible interest in this true crime stuff, so I expect these endeavors to continue and expand on and on. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the social media trials. A few weeks ago, I went into this because I said that the trial out in California, where there was a single victim suing Meta and YouTube on a social media addiction theory, was one of the more significant civil trials I had seen in a long time because it had the possibility to pave the way for other trials and really to set the way that we think about the liability of social media companies, much like the tobacco cases a number of years ago changed the way we market cigarettes and what we think about cigarettes. So we got two results this week. In New Mexico, Meta was ordered to pay $375 million for violating New Mexico law in child exploitation cases. Jurors found that Meta willfully violated the state's Unfair Practices Act and that the company should pay $375 million in damages. The plaintiff here was seeking something closer to $2 billion, so that's not as bad of a loss as it could have been. Meta has said that they respectfully disagree with the verdict and they intend to appeal. That's what most defendants say when they lose a verdict like that. There is a second stage of the trial that's going to commence on May 4th. By the way they did that math there is there was a maximum penalty of $5,000 per violation of these counts under the Unfair Practices Act. And New Mexico said there were 200,000 or 208,000 monthly teenage users of this app. And so from New Mexico's point of view, they wanted about $2 billion, $5,000 times 2 times 200,000 users. And the jury came back to $375 million, which is about $1,800 per teen. I don't know exactly how they got to that math, and juries tend to do rough justice. They figure out about what they want to award and they work their way backwards. And sometimes, of course, in these civil trials, it's a bit of a compromise. There may be jurors who really think that liability is clear and other jurors that aren't so sure. And so they negotiate and find liability, but for a lesser damage amount. So you end up at $375 million in a case where the prosecutors were seeking $2 billion. Moving to Los Angeles, a jury found Meta and YouTube negligent in a social media addiction trial, and they awarded this plaintiff, and this was a single plaintiff case, $6 million, $3 million in compensatory damages, and $3 million in punitive damages. If I understand this correctly, the compensatory damages were broken down 70% for Meta, 30% for YouTube, and the punitive damages were also broken down, $2.1 million to be paid for Meta and $900,000 to be paid by YouTube. But that's $6 million for a single plaintiff. Now, $6 million is nothing for a company like Meta or a company like YouTube. However, there are thousands of cases waiting in the wings from other alleged victims who say that they were addicted to social media because of the company. And this case, this trial was viewed as what we call a bellwether. This was an initial trial to see how a jury might react to the allegations, to the evidence, how a jury might come in. Sometimes when you have situations like this, where there's a lot of pending separate litigation, you go forward with a few of the cases to get an idea of where they would come out, and then the parties going forward should arrange settlements based on that. So it's possible that Meta and YouTube will be looking to settle out a lot of those cases, paying out some money on the claims, especially the ones that have very attractive plaintiffs, to try to get rid of them before they go to trial. Unless they think that this verdict by this jury was some kind of outlier, or if they think they have a good appellate argument, I don't know what further proceedings are going to be in the case. $6 million, again, is nothing, but if you multiply that by thousands and thousands of claims, you get into pretty serious numbers. And listen, now you have two juries, one in New Mexico and one in California, and they're both saying, we don't like the way these social media companies handled teenage users. We don't think they protected the teenage users enough from becoming addicted to using this material too much and from doing harm to themselves. The plaintiff in California said she got addicted, she had body image problems, she was depressed, she had significant injuries on the basis of using social media. And we have two juries now who seem to be on the side of the plaintiff. That is significant. It's a signal to social media companies that they have to do more and more to protect teen users. I think they have been doing more. That was some of the testimony that we got in the trial. And it's a signal to the lawyers that you're going to have trouble defending these cases, at least out west. I don't know how it will play in other parts of the country, but I think people and juries are looking to protect teenagers. I'm not really surprised by the outcome in either of these cases. All right. So that's just a quick update on the social media cases. I think it's really significant for how social media is going to conduct itself going forward and the remainder of the litigation. Now we know something about that. Now we know some more about Court TV and Law and Crime. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget, like and subscribe and all that kind of shenanigans. I'm going to try to line up some other panelists and be back soon with more discussion-oriented context. I think that went really well with Josh and Franz last week. I want to do more like that going forward and continue reporting on significant legal matters, especially civil litigation. So that's it for now. We are adjourned.